Hi, I'm Kurt with Digital Tutors. Welcome to this course where we'll focus on manipulating and retouching the body of a female model. If you've ever looked at a model on the cover of a magazine, odds are that model has been retouched and manipulated to some degree in Photoshop. We'll begin this process by focusing on our subject's neck and chin, where we'll use Liquify in Photoshop to reshape both features. Following this, we'll spend some time peeling away some weight from her face by using the clone stamp tool to reduce some of the shadows. From there, we'll move on to the body, where we'll jump back into Liquify to trim the waistline and thin down the figure. Next, we'll tackle repositioning the right arm and slimming it down some as well. As we continue to sculpt our model's body, we'll also resize and reshape her chest area to fit the manipulations that we've made to her figure. And finally, we'll focus on removing some unwanted folds in her dress and applying final touch-ups to the overall form. After watching this course, you'll be able to use Photoshop to retouch and manipulate models for your own projects with added confidence while having a lot of fun. So with that, we'll get started in our next lesson. In this lesson, we'll begin the process of photo manipulation on our female subject by slimming down her neck. So let's go ahead and get started. So if you've ever picked up a magazine with a beautiful model on the cover, odds are that model has been retouched and manipulated to some degree here in Photoshop. And this could be by slimming down their waist and arms or removing any unflattering blemishes from their skin. So we're going to be demonstrating a full body photo manipulation on our female subject that we have here in the green dress. Basically, what we're going to be doing is analyzing different areas of her entire body and pushing them towards a stronger sense of idealized beauty and perfection. Now, this is by no means to say that she's not already very beautiful and attractive. She is. We just want to demonstrate how we can take some different areas, some different parts of her form, and just push them further towards that idealized sense of beauty. So I want to go ahead and start by focusing on the face, basically the face and this neck area. The face is really an area that you're going to initially look at first, whether you're looking at an album cover or a movie poster or a magazine cover that has a person on it. Your eyes are going to instantly gravitate towards the face area, and that's because that's where a lot of emotion and expression can be conveyed. So let's go ahead and zoom in by hitting Control equals on our keyboard and just get a closer look here. I'm also holding down space bar to pan around. And so just looking at her neck here, I kind of feel like we could maybe slim it down a little bit, just kind of reducing some of this information right in here, just kind of pulling it in some. Now, before I attempt to do this, you want to look over here in the layers panel. You can see we have one layer, which I've titled original. This is our original photo as we see it. I don't want to make any changes to this original image because I may want to come back to it at some point. I may want to pull something from it later on. So what I want to go ahead and do is right click on this layer and choose duplicate layer. And let's go ahead and just title it neck, since that's what we're going to be focusing on primarily in this lesson. You're going to be finding me doing this quite a bit throughout this course, whether we duplicate layers or create merged copies of information. That way I can keep basically a kind of a progress of the different stages in which I performed these different photo manipulations on different parts of her body. That way I'm not doing everything on one layer. So I definitely recommend doing that if you're following along. Now let's jump into an extremely powerful feature of Photoshop. This is Liquify. So we want to go up to Filter and then navigate down here to where it says Liquify. And this takes us right into the Liquify dialog box. And we're going to be using Liquify pretty much throughout this entire course. Over here to the screen left, we have a variety of tools at our disposal that we can use to basically manipulate pixel information. Here in the center, we see a preview of our image. And off to the screen right, we have a variety of different settings that we can use to control how we apply and use these different tools over here on the screen left. Now, if you're not seeing what I'm seeing over here on the screen right, if you're not seeing a lot of these different settings, you want to make sure that you click on where it says Advanced Mode. You want to check mark that box. Okay, so you can kind of see the difference right there. Okay, let's go ahead and zoom in once again by hitting Control equals on our keyboard. And we'll kind of zoom in to 100% here, focusing on her neck. So this first tool here at the top on the screen left is the Forward Warp tool. This is an amazing tool that I'm probably going to be using more so than some of these other tools because we can basically use it to move pixels around. All right, so just to quickly demonstrate, I can just take the cursor here and pull in, and you can see I've just taken a big chunk out of her neck. Now, I don't want to do that, but you can see what this tool is capable of doing. Let's go ahead and take a step back by hitting Control Z. Okay, so we want to now look under Tool Options over here to the screen right. We have brush size, density, and pressure. We have the ability to control each one of these for our Forward Warp tool. So this first one is pretty obvious. We can control the size of the brush, as you can see here, making it larger or smaller depending on which way if we increase the numbers higher, it's going to become larger. If we take the numbers lower, it'll become smaller. Next, we have brush density. Okay, this basically allows us to control the edge strength of our brush tip right here. Right now, it's set to 100%, meaning, let's go ahead and size up our brush more. This means if I were to pull all this information this way, we're pulling everything pretty uniformly, okay? We're making full use of the entire range, the entire radius of this brush tip, okay? Just taking a step back there. Now, let's say I take it down significantly, say to like 30 or so. What's happened now is the brush strength is become more concentrated towards the center of our brush tip here. So you can see kind of how that feels a little bit more concentrated towards the center. And we could even go more extreme with it and pull it way down to like closer to 10. You can kind of get a sense of that now as I drag that over. So this is a really cool feature that gives us a lot of control. Next, we have brush pressure, okay? Let me go ahead and just take this back up to say 100 really quick to demonstrate brush pressure. So right now, it's set to 100%. This allows us to control the strength of the distortion that we're applying. So you can kind of see once again how that looks. However, I'll go ahead and take it way down. And you can see as we drag now, you can see the difference, how it's not as intense as it was before. So we're going to be kind of playing around with these different settings as we go, kind of changing up these numbers to really have a better sense of control in just different areas that we're working on. So I'll go ahead and take my brush pressure up, say, to about 80% or so. Let's go ahead and take our brush density down just a little bit, and I'm going to decrease my brush size. What I want to do is pull in this neck area. Now, my next big concern is I don't want to affect some other elements around the neck area. I don't want to push around or move around pixel information, say for the lips or the chin or this earring over here. This is where we can use another tool called the Freeze Mask tool, another tool that we'll be using quite a bit. Again, we have similar settings over here. I'm going to increase the brush size just a little bit. Basically, what this allows us to do is we can paint a mask over areas that we do not want affected. Okay, so depending on what tools we're using, if we don't want to affect specific areas, we can mask them out. And again, I can reduce this brush size. Say I don't want to affect that earring in behind. I can go ahead and paint a mask over that. Now, I am going to mention this area right here momentarily. Regardless of masking out this particular area, it still may be affected just because it's right up against the edge of what we're wanting to move. And so this may be a little bit futile trying to mask out that portion of the image. And we'll kind of get a sense of that here in just a second. Okay, so you kind of see what we've done here. And when, again, you can kind of rein it in even further just in different areas. Now, if there are any areas that you don't want the mask to be applied, you can choose the thaw mask tool and basically reveal away the image underneath. Okay, cool. So let's go ahead now and jump to our forward warp tool. And let's start to pull in this neck. So just kind of pulling it up like so. All right, that's starting to feel pretty nice. And you can see how that earring in behind is still getting stretched. And again, that's because it's just right up along the edge of what we're trying to do. There has to be some sort of information right there as we pull it. And so naturally, we're getting some stretching right there. And that's okay, because we're going to talk about how we can quickly rectify that. Now I may want to go ahead and decrease my brush size. And we can kind of start to kind of pull in these different areas just a little bit, pulling in the neck. I also may want to reduce the brush density and the brush pressure so that I'm not making too extreme of a changes just yet. So again, I reduce the brush density some to kind of concentrate it more towards the center. I may not want to pull as wide a range as I kind of start to polish up some of these different areas. That may be just a little low there. All right, very good. So just kind of zooming out there, we can see how that's looking a lot better than it did before. Again, we're kind of pushing towards that idealized sense of beauty. And so you may want to spend some time just kind of practicing with these different settings over here to kind of get a feel for them. And once you've got a feel for them, you'll kind of know really what you want over here as far as you begin to manipulate some of these different areas on whatever image you're working on. Okay, great. Now, one thing I would like to show you is if there's a specific area that you were unhappy with how you manipulated it, you can use your reconstruct tool over here. So we'll just go ahead and demonstrate this really quick. You can see how it starts to revert back to the way it was as you paint it over. And again, we have some similar settings over here with the inclusion of brush rate. Basically, if you're using it holding down stationary, you can control the rate in which all of that is being applied to your image. Let's go ahead and commit to this by clicking OK. We can kind of zoom out here, and you can start to see the difference, how we've started to pull that neck in. Now again, I don't want that stretched out earring back in there. That looks kind of weird. So this is where we can use our clone stamp tool over here. Okay, over here in our tool panel. And with the clone stamp tool, we can select an area of the background just by holding down Alt. You can see how it changes the cursor, and we can click and sample. And now we can start to clone out that earring. We can also reduce the size a little bit if we want. We can also change the brush preset as well. If we want more of a hard round brush, we can. So basically you have a lot of the same settings that you can apply just to a regular brush. And you can even kind of clean up some of these little edges right here using the clone stamp tool. Okay, great. Next thing I want to go ahead and do is go back to my original image. So I'm going to go ahead and just click on that little eye button right there to hide the visibility of our neck layer. We'll jump back to our original image, and I want to go ahead and take my lasso tool, and I'm going to go ahead and draw a selection around that earring. Once we've done that, I'm going to right click on that selection and choose layer via copy. You can see that makes a new layer containing just that selection that I made. And I'm going to pull it above our neck layer. Okay, and there you can see it right there. Okay, now let's go ahead and I'm just going to right click over that and choose free transform, and let's just kind of move it around here and kind of reposition it. we could even take our eraser tool and just kind of clean that little edge of it up right there. All right, great. Now let's go ahead and make kind of a comparison here just by turning on and off the visibility of those two layers. You can see how we've already started the process of manipulating our female subject. We've trimmed off basically a lot of weight right there in the neck area. The next area I want to focus on is the chin. It's feeling a little bit disproportionate now that we've pulled in the neck area. We want to kind of reduce the tip of it a little bit and kind of clean up any additional information so that it feels like it matches the overall kind of flow of the neck and chin area right here. And again, kind of pushing towards that idealized sense of beauty. So that's what we're going to focus on in the next lesson. So stick around and we'll see you then. In this lesson, we'll focus on reshaping the size of our model's chin. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so in our previous lesson, we started with our first photo manipulation of our female model by focusing on her neck area, just using the forward warp tool in the liquefy feature of Photoshop. We're able to pull that neck inward, thus creating the illusion that she has a more slimmed down and thinner neck. You'll also recall that we did this after making a duplicate of our original layer. We don't want to make any changes or manipulations to the original image in case we need to go back to it and pull anything from it. And that's exactly what we had to do with that earring that's kind of peeking out from behind her neck. After pulling that neck inward, you may recall that the earring right there was getting kind of smudged and blurred. And so what we were able to do is go back to the original layer, make a selection, and do a layer via copy of that earring and place that on a new layer above the neck and just kind of weave that in there very easily. Okay, so having done this to her neck, I'm now looking at her chin. I feel that it is a little bit large, feels a little bit heavy, has a little bit too much weight compared to her neck now. And so what I'd like to do is kind of continue on shooting for that idealized sense of beauty and perfection by perhaps reducing the size and overall contour of her chin and have it flow very nicely into her neck. And again, that's really what we're trying to demonstrate with our model here, is pushing for that idealized beauty, despite the fact that she is already very beautiful and attractive. So before we do that, let's go ahead over here in our layers panel. Let's kind of start the process of just staying organized. We're going to have a lot of layers by the time we're finished with this project. So with that earring layer selected, I'll hold down Shift and also select the neck layer. And let's hit Control G and group them together. And I'll title this group Neck. What I want to do now, having done that, is create a merged copy. A merged copy will basically create an image containing everything that is visible to us right now, anything that has the eye button next to it, any layer that has a visible eye button next to it will be included in the merged copy. So let's go ahead and hit Shift, Control, Alt, and E on our keyboard. That gives us a merged copy, and we'll call this layer Chin. Very good. So now let's go back into Liquify, and on this new chin layer, we'll work on the chin. We're going to go to Filter and back to Liquify. So we've used this forward warp tool, which again, we're going to be using it quite a bit. We've used the freeze and thaw mask tools. I've also showed you that you can use the reconstruct tool if there's ever an area that you're unsatisfied with the way it's starting to look. You can use it to restore how it was looking. We're also going to use in this lesson the pucker tool. So the pucker tool is going to allow us to shrink down that chin, reduce its size. It pulls in pixels inward. And so we'll get a good sense of it here in a moment. Let's go ahead and zoom in, hitting Control equals on our keyboard. Let's zoom into like 200% actually to really get in there. I want to take my freeze mask tool and let's go ahead and paint over areas that we do not want affected by our pucker tool. So pretty much the lips, I don't want to really mess with the neck since I'm pretty happy with the way we've kind of reshaped it in the previous lesson. Okay, very good. So we'll select the pucker tool now, and we've got some similar settings under our tool options over here to the screen right. Obviously, we can control the brush size by adjusting this number right here for brush size. So just taking it up just a little ways, that feels pretty nice. Next, we have brush density. Again, this controls the edge strength of our pucker tools brush right here. So right now it's at 62. It's got basically we had the same settings that we had for our forward warp tool still here. I want to take this up to 100%. This will utilize the full radius of our brush right here, our brush tip. And I'm going to shrink down everything very uniformly by having that radius, that brush density set to 100%. Next, we have brush rate. And so what this allows us to do, and I'm just taking it back up to 100% to really demonstrate it, you can control the rate in which this puckering happens. So at 100%, if I click and hold, you can see how quickly it shrunk down that area. Definitely do not want her chin to be that small. So let's go ahead and hit Control Z and take a step back. So what I want to do is let's try and take that brush rate down significantly, maybe around 25, 30 would be good. Now, if I click and hold, you can see how it reduces that chin just at a slower rate. So you got a little bit of control there. And again, I had that brush density at 100, so it kind of pulled everything for the chin down very uniformly. Now let's go ahead and take that density down a little bit, maybe around 60. I'll reduce the size of my brush, bring it down some. And so now we're kind of concentrating that edge strength, the strength of this brush more towards the center of the brush tip. So we can kind of control it right there, just kind of reducing just that little area right there on the tip of the chin. Okay, very nice. Now let's jump back to our forward warp tool. May want to increase the size of the brush tip just a little bit. And we may take the density down just slightly. And I'll start to kind of clean up the overall contour of the chin, making sure it flows nicely into the neck. And again, I like having the brush pressure just a little bit lower. Okay. So again, the brush pressure controls the distortion strength. I don't want it to be too strong. For something like this where we're really getting in there, it just allows me to have a little bit more control. And I'll take down the size a little bit more. And I kind of noticed that this area underneath the lower lip got kind of pulled down just a bit much for my liking. So kind of adjusting that. And we'll just kind of sculpt the overall chin just a little bit here. I don't want it to feel too round, too bulbous. I want it to kind of have a very slight, subtle, kind of sharp angle right there and then round off nicely. I think that'll look very nice. Great, that's feeling pretty good. Let's go ahead and kind of zoom out, see how that's looking. And we can even take our thaw mask and kind of erase that to see how our chin is looking. All right, great. Let's go ahead and commit to that. And having done that, we can make a comparison here. And we can see how we've already made another huge change to our female model. And we can go ahead and uncheck the chin as well as the neck group. And we can see that we've basically shaved off, peeled away a lot of weight just in this whole area right here. Now, another thing that I'm noticing is this kind of weird little spot right here, just the way the lighting is. I think she may have had a very slight kind of recess in the chin, perhaps. And that kind of carried over as we shrunk down the chin, right? So I want to kind of smooth that out just a little bit. And I'm going to use my clone stamp tool to do this. Now, I don't want to do this on my chin layer, especially if you're satisfied with the manipulations you've made to the chin. You want to go ahead and do this on a new layer, okay? That way, if you mess up with your cloning, you can just erase it or delete that layer and you haven't affected the manipulation that you've already done to the chin. So let's make a new layer. And we can call this like clone if you want. Okay. And I'll go to my clone stamp. And for the clone stamp, we want to make sure to switch from current layer. We're just going to go ahead and select all layers. This will allow us to sample from all the layers that we have visible in our layers panel. And I basically want to use a soft round brush. I'll take down the size. So I've just right-clicked to bring up the brush preset picker. And let's jump to our brush panel, and I'm going to turn on transfer. And under transfer, I want to make sure I have pen pressure selected for both of the controls for opacity and flow. So based off of how much pressure I apply to my Cintiq screen with my stylus, I can control just the intensity of the opacity and flow. So I'm going to hold down Alt, and you can see how that changes my cursor. Let's sample from kind of a lighter area over here and kind of bring in some of that over that kind of area right there. I kind of want to make this a little bit more smoothed out. And I'm also kind of sampling from kind of a darker area over here as well. And as I do this, I'll kind of zoom out. That's feeling pretty nice. May reduce the size just a little bit more. Kind of cleaning up a little bit of darkness that we have right there that I don't really like how that's looking. So that's feeling pretty nice. Also, I kind of want to reduce the intensity of that shadow right there coming up, just given that we kind of changed the overall curvature of the chin itself. It's a little bit more straight right there. So I feel like that shadow will be kind of a little bit more down there now, not so much up here. We can also reduce the opacity of this layer just a little bit to kind of help weave that in just a little bit more. All right, very nice. I'm liking how her chin is looking. It's flowing very nicely into the neck. Let's go ahead and group these two together as well. Just hitting Control G after selecting both of those, and I'll call this group chin. All right, great. So the next thing I want to do now, we'll do this in our next lesson, is I want to focus on her face. The face really is a major focal point when you look at a magazine cover or a movie poster containing a person. You're going to look at the face initially because that's where a lot of expression, a lot of emotion is conveyed. So we're going to spend another lesson focusing on the face, and I just want to reduce some of these shadows right here. Her face feels a little bit full, and it feels very contrasting to what we've done already right here. So I want to kind of reduce this shadow right here under the jaw, as well as maybe this shadow right here, kind of on the cheek, kind of this upper part of the cheek right here, and maybe right here at the corner of the mouth. Just kind of lightening those up a little bit will create the illusion that her face is just a little bit more slimmed down. Again, shooting for that idealized sense of beauty and perfection. So stick around and we'll tackle that very easily in our next lesson. In this lesson, we'll focus on reducing some of the fullness of our model's face by lowering the intensity of some shadows. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so over the past couple of lessons, we've already made some pretty significant changes to our model here. We basically kind of created the illusion that she has a more slimmed down neck as well as just a smaller chin. So just by unchecking the visibility for both the chin and neck groups, we can already see, just making that comparison from the original, what a huge change we've made. So again, we're taking our very attractive and beautiful model and pushing different parts of her towards that more idealized sense of beauty and perfection, just by looking for some different areas of her entire body to really push them further. So having done this with the neck and the chin, I'm just zooming back in here, and I'm now looking at just the rest of the face. Again, the face is really a focal point. It's an area where you'll initially look at first because that's where a lot of emotion and expression can be conveyed. So now that I've slimmed down her neck and adjusted the contour of her chin as well as the size of her chin, I kind of feel like her face feels a little bit full, okay? And this is because of some of the shadows that we have in the face. Right here, for example, in between the nose and the cheek, we got a slight shadow right here at the corner of the mouth. And then this jaw right here feels a little bit too prominent. And so we want to reduce the intensity of these shadows, kind of lighten them up a little bit, if you will. this will create the illusion that her face is a little bit more slimmed down. These areas will not appear as rounded or full, okay? So to do this, let's go ahead and create a new layer by clicking on this button right here at the bottom of our Layers panel. And we'll go ahead and title this layer Lighten Facial Shadows, all right? So we're going to jump back to our Clone Stamp tool. And again, you want to go up here to your control panel and make sure you have all layers selected for sample. If you leave it set to current layer, you're not going to be able to source or sample from any of the surrounding information because there's nothing on this new layer that we've created. All right. I'm going to right click, bring up my brush preset picker. I'm going to adjust the size of my brush. I'm still going to use a soft round brush like I did in the previous lesson. That really kind of helps blend in that cloned information very nicely. I also want to make sure in my brush panel that I still have transfer check marked with pen pressure enabled for the controls for both opacity and flow. So again, I'm using a Wacom stylus and a Cintiq. So based off the amount of pressure I apply to my screen, I can control the opacity and flow of this cloned information. So I'm just holding down Alt and kind of sampling from kind of this mid-toned value right here of her cheek. So just clicking right there. And I'm going to start to kind of clone that information right over that kind of darker shadow right there. And that's looking pretty nice. We can already make kind of a quick comparison, as you can see right there. That area doesn't feel as rounded or full. When it's more rounded, it's going to create kind of a recess right there, where light isn't basically reaching in that area very well. Now, I don't want to remove this shadow completely, okay? But I still want kind of a remnants of it to be still there. You know, we still want to have form to these different areas of the face that have these shadows. What I'm doing now is taking my eraser tool. I'm just using a soft round brush with the same setting, and I'm just kind of lightly dabbing over some of these different areas, just kind of reining in some of that cloned in information. Okay, that feels pretty nice. Let's go ahead and do the same thing with this area right here at the corner of her mouth. We kind of have a little bit of a recess right there, so I'm just kind of sampling, again, holding down Alt, just kind of cloning in some of that surrounding lighter valued skin. And again, kind of making a quick comparison. And what a difference that makes. Same thing as I mentioned for this lower jaw area. I don't want to remove the shadow completely. I just want to kind of reduce it some. So I'm going to kind of sample from right about here, right where it's kind of a mid-tone value. It's not as light as it is right here, but just kind of right in here. And what I might want to do, I'll take a couple steps back here. Let's increase the size of my brush. And again, having this soft round brush allows us to kind of sample from this lighter value and kind of weave it in very smoothly. You don't really want to use a hard round brush because you're going to have just a lot of contrasting values. It'd just be harder to kind of weave in. That's feeling pretty nice though. All right, excellent. And again, I'll probably take my eraser tool here using a soft round brush. Just kind of rein in, just very lightly applying some pressure, kind of pulling back some of that cloned in information, kind of fading some of it out just a little bit more. Very nice. Let's explore using another type of healing tool, if you will, for the face here. So as we look at this kind of highlighted area of the cheek, I see a little bit of unevenness. And so just to kind of push the overall appeal of the face, I may want to use the healing brush tool, okay? So like the cloning tools, you can use the healing brush tool to paint with sampled pixels from an image. However, the healing brush tool also matches the texture, the lighting, and transparency and shading from the sampled pixels to the pixels being healed, okay? Whereas the clone stamp tool is just a direct copy from one area to another. So we can use this healing brush tool. I'll go ahead and right click. I may want to make sure the hardness is pretty low. We'll take up the size just a little bit there. Again, I want to have all layers chosen. And I'll kind of sample from this highlighted area right there. And I just want to kind of even out this overall area right here. This is kind of a minor thing, kind of a minor touch, but it might be nice to go ahead and do that. We can also do this to kind of help weave it into the information that we already have. Kind of want to be careful right there. Kind of got a little weird hard edge. Just kind of very subtle. Some subtle areas right here. We're wanting to use that. Now let's go ahead and make another comparison, and we can see just what a huge change we made right there, just on the side of the cheek. It just feels a lot more evened out. So that contour right there of her cheek feels a lot more even. It doesn't feel as kind of bumpy as it did before just by doing that. And we'll zoom out just a little bit more here, kind of seeing it from another vantage point. Very nice. And at this point, you can even still reduce the opacity of this layer if you wanted to. You could bring it down just a little bit, perhaps. Again, we don't want to remove any of those shadows in their entirety. Her face would look kind of unnatural, okay? You still want to show that there's structure under there, that there's a skeletal structure. By completely removing the shadows, it would look very unnatural. Just wanting to kind of reduce the intensity a little bit. All right, that's feeling really, really nice. So we'll go ahead and just kind of make another comparison just by unchecking all of the layers that we've created thus far, going back to that original. And you can see what a huge change we've made so far. Again, kind of pushing for that idealized sense of beauty and perfection. So having done all this, let's go ahead and just zoom all the way out here. And now what I'd like to do is shift gears, and starting in the next lesson, we're going to focus on another part of the body. We're going to focus on the waistline down here, okay? And basically what I want to do is reduce the waistline, okay? So stick around, and we're going to tackle that in the next lesson, and we're going to talk about how we can go back into Liquify to achieve the visual look that we want for her waistline area. In this lesson, we'll learn how we can trim the width of our model's waistline by using tools in Liquify. So let's go ahead and get started. All right, so we've spent the last 3 lessons focusing on our model's facial area. We started off with the neck, then we migrated to the chin, and then we also worked on some of those shadows in the face. I like to start out with basically the head of a person on a project like this, because that's really where a lot of expression, a lot of emotion is going to be conveyed. And thus our eyes are going to gravitate towards this area initially to really receive all that before moving around the rest of the form. So we're going to shift gears now and focus on another part of the body, which will be the waistline. We're going to kind of start off by going back into Liquify and kind of pulling in both sides of the waist to kind of trim it down and also kind of resculpt the contours of this side of the waist right here on the screen left, or you can think of it as the right side of her waist. Now before we do this, I want to go ahead and make another merged copy. So let's go ahead and hit Shift, Control, Alt, and E. That basically gives us a merged copy containing everything in our layers panel that has an eye next to it, a little eye button. Basically anything that is visual in your layers panel will be included in that merged copy. So be mindful of that in case there's something you don't want included. As I mentioned earlier in the course, we're going to have several merged copies throughout our progress. This does a couple of things. It allows us to kind of preserve significant points or significant states of our progress. And secondly, whenever we want to make a huge change, a huge manipulation in Liquify, we really want to do that on kind of a layer that has everything merged down. Liquify really won't allow us to make changes across multiple layers at one time. Now I could go back into the layer that we have for our chin, seeing as how we had everything pretty well contained up here on the head area, and make changes to the waist, but I really want to keep those things separate, okay? Just in case by accident I make a manipulation that affects the head or the chin without my knowledge. I've got those things separated. Okay, great. I'm going to go ahead and title this new merged layer, I'm going to call it waistline. All right, excellent. Now let's go back into the liquefy feature of Photoshop by going to Filter and then to Liquefy. So we're going to be basically pulling in the waistline, kind of pulling it inward, primarily from this side as well as from this side as well. Now, as we do this, it's imperative that we do not affect any other areas surrounding this just yet, primarily the arms, anything above the chest area here, as well as the opposite side over here. I don't really want to mess with the lower part of the dress. So let's go ahead and take our freeze mask. I'll go ahead and increase the brush size for our freeze mask tool. And I'm basically going to paint kind of from the chest up, this arm over here, and then just everything down here. And just for good measure, we'll cover up the rest of her body just in case I accidentally grab something without realizing it. I'll take my thaw tool. I'll reduce the size of that brush just a little bit. Let's zoom in here. And I'll kind of rein that in right there just a little bit because I do want to kind of be able to pull in that area as well. Okay, great. That's looking pretty good. Just kind of examining it overall. So this is the area that I really want to focus on in starting to kind of thin down just her overall waistline, even her hip area here as well. So we're going to take our forward warp tool once again. Again, this is a tool that I'm going to be relying on heavily. It allows me to essentially move pixels around. Let's go ahead and take up the brush size significantly. As I do this, I'll hover back over the preview of our image here to kind of see how the brush size is looking. That's feeling pretty nice. Now I want to take up the density to 100, meaning that I'm utilizing the full radius of this brush tip. I'm going to be able to pull everything over very uniformly at first. And we'll leave our brush pressure down. I usually like to keep it down a ways. I don't want it up at a full 100%. And so I'll kind of come off right about here, and I'll start to kind of pull everything in. Okay? Might increase my brush size up just a little bit more. We'll just pull that in just a little bit more. Okay, great. And I want to do kind of the same thing on the other side. We're just kind of pulling that information in, pulling it inward. All right, great. We'll kind of zoom out here and see everything as a whole. You'll also notice there's a little bit of information over here as we did that, getting pulled from the edge of the image. And I'll show how we can easily fix that here in just a second. Let's go ahead and take our brush size down significantly now, a little bit more. And I'll reduce the density now. I don't really want to, I want to kind of concentrate the edge strength or the strength of the brush more towards the center now. Just kind of bringing that tummy in a little bit. Bringing that waist in a little bit. All right, good. And so now I'm bringing my brush down a little bit more. We've basically pulled over a lot of information, as you can see. We've already made a visual change. Now I'm bringing my brush size down a lot more. And I'm starting to kind of fine-tune some of these different areas. I'm wanting to kind of redesign kind of the curvature of this hip area right here. We're kind of getting a little bit of a hint of kind of her backside there, her caboose, if you will. So I don't want it to appear flat. I want there to be a little bit of curvature right there and have it flow nicely up into her waist. Now I'm going to bring my brush down significantly even more, and I want to kind of start to redesign some of these folds and how they look. Right now they feel kind of baggy and loose. Now before I do this, I may take my thaw tool. I'll kind of clear back some of that information right there. And zooming in here, we'll kind of start to pull some of that in. And that's feeling pretty nice. Go ahead and bring my brush tip down even more, pretty low actually. And so what I'm doing now is kind of reshaping just this overall little fold that we have right here, kind of wrapping around the body. I want basically the dress to hug the body a little bit more, because before it was kind of looking pretty baggy. Even before we made any kind of changes, there were some areas where it was kind of pooching out or poking out a little bit. And so as I look at this, actually, I may want to kind of pull that in just a lot more. Again, I'm trying to have it hug kind of the side of her body right there. All right, great. Now we'll kind of focus on this area right here. Kind of just reshaping some of these folds to where they feel like they kind of wrap around the waist a little bit more clearly. Something kind of like that. And as I do this, I like to zoom out. So that's feeling pretty nice, I must say. What I want to go ahead and do now is I'll take my thaw mask. Let's kind of clear away a lot of this information now that we see here. While we're at it really quick, we can take this tool right here, just the push left tool. And you can see how it works. Basically, if you pull upward, it's pulling everything towards the screen left. If you pull down, it's pulling pixel information towards the screen right. So you can kind of clean up that edge right there. Pretty handy tool. Not primarily just used for stuff like that. You can also use it anywhere on whatever you're trying to perform manipulations on. But I find it handy for situations like that where you're essentially pulling over information, large amounts, and pulling the edge of your image over. Okay, so let's go ahead and explore another cool tool that we have over here. This is the twirl clockwise tool. What I want to do is maybe kind of focus on kind of the angle of these stripes right here. I want to kind of maybe twirl them clockwise just a little bit, make them a little bit more vertical. And what I might actually do is we'll bring back in some of that mask right there. Just kind of right in here. We'll take this twirl clockwise. We'll increase the brush size just a little bit. This is a pretty cool tool. Again, has similar settings as we have for some of these other tools. We have a brush rate. If you recall, it controls the rate at which all of this will happen. I may want to take that down significantly. And just holding down, we can see how it's kind of twirling all that information right there. I kind of want those lines to be a little bit more vertical and not slanted outwards. Again, that kind of aids to the slenderness of her waistline, her tummy area right there. One thing you want to be really, really careful of is keeping these lines very consistent. This is a lot different than if we had just a solid colored dress. It'd be very, very easy. But we don't want these lines to look squiggly or offset or anything like that. So as you do this, handle it with care. And this is important because later on we're going to explore how we can get rid of a lot of these little folds right here. Especially right in here, these little folds that we have right here kind of create the illusion that this part of her belly is sticking out. And we're going to kind of towards the end of the course explore how we can make this all nice and seamless. And so before we do all that later on, I just want to kind of have these lines a little bit more kind of straightened out initially, just kind of right here in the tummy area. Take my thaw mask tool once again, kind of see how all that is looking. Very nice, feeling pretty good. And so at this point, we can even make other little tweaks just to the curvature that we see right here on these lines. Later on, we'll start to kind of come up here into the breast area and kind of adjust the overall shape and form that we see right here just in her breast area to where it fits more of a slimmed down version of her body. And I actually wanted to kind of thaw back that little spot right there. I'm not going to do too much right now, but I'm kind of starting to think about what that'll look like. Right now, her breasts don't really feel like they fit with what we've got over here as far as slimming down her body. They feel like they sag a little bit. They actually feel overly large. And so we want to kind of rectify that later on in the course. In our next lesson, we're going to kind of continue on trimming down her body. Now that we've slimmed down her waist, we want to kind of focus on this other side of her body right over here, primarily where we have this shoulder area over here and her arm over here. That's feeling like it's a little bit disproportionate now, so I want to pull all that over. Let's actually go ahead and commit to the changes we have. We can kind of start to make a comparison and see what we've already got here. So I want to pull all of this information over here just a little bit more inward, just very slightly. And then from there, we'll focus on this arm over here, pulling it in. So that's what we're going to tackle in the next couple of lessons up ahead. So stick around and we'll see you then. In this lesson, we'll continue focusing on slimming down the overall form of our model by pulling in the left side of the body. So let's go ahead and get started. All right, so in the previous lesson, we focused on basically slimming down our female model's waist area. So if we go ahead and turn off the visibility of our waistline layer, we can see what a dramatic change we've already made just by going back into Liquify using the forward warp tool. We kind of pulled in this side of her body right here, pulling it inward, as well as taking this side of her tummy and pulling that inward as well. We also use the forward warp tool to kind of adjust the overall kind of shape and contour of this side of her dress, having it feel a lot less baggy, kind of adjusting the overall shape to where it hugs the body a little bit more. Kind of doing the same thing with those folds as well, to where it feels like they wrap around the body a little bit better. And you can kind of get a sense of that just making another comparison, how there were some areas that felt a little bit baggy or kind of bulging out. So just kind of rectifying that. What we want to do now is basically take the whole left side of her body, or the screen right side, if you will, and just kind of slightly pull all that information inward as well. This will add to just the overall slimming effect that we want for her body. Again, kind of pushing towards that idealized sense of beauty and perfection. So with that said, let's go ahead and make another merged layer, another merged copy, if you will, just by hitting Shift Control Alt E. And we'll go ahead and title this merged copy Left Side Pull In. Again, I like to have merged copies for significant changes in the state of our photo manipulation, okay? This makes doing changes, performing changes, much easier than if we did everything on one layer, okay? So if we did more photo manipulations on our waistline layer, we saved the file, closed out of it, and came back and realized that our most recent change wasn't to our liking, then it poses a lot of problems. We're going to have to basically redo not just the change that we had, but also the changes to the waistline, which we were happy with, by basically scrapping that layer and starting over. So kind of having those benchmarks, I think, is really important. So let's go into Filter and back into Liquify. It's also important to note, if I haven't mentioned it already, that Liquify does not allow you to create these manipulations across multiple layers at one time. You can preview layers beneath whatever it is you're trying to change in Liquify, but you can't apply these Liquify tools and have them affect multiple layers at one time. So also keep that in mind as well. Okay, so what I want to go ahead and do is take my Freeze Mask tool, and I want to freeze or mask out areas that I do not want affected as I pull over this whole screen right or left side, if you will, of our female model's body. Okay, so just kind of masking out this whole side right here. So basically everything on the screen left side of her body. This is also what you would think of as the right side of her body. Okay. Now let's take our forward warp tool. I want to pull up the brush size significantly this time. Pretty high to where we can encompass pretty much everything that we see over here. That feels pretty nice. I also want to take up the brush density. Again, this is the brush edge strength. By taking it up to 100%, we're utilizing the entire radius, basically every bit of this brush tip, so I can pull over everything more uniformly. So with that said, I'll go ahead and kind of hover right about here and just kind of start to pull in the body. Okay, so that's feeling pretty nice. Now you'll notice, as you've seen before, this screen right side of the image is kind of getting pulled in right there. We can easily rectify that here in a moment using our push left tool. Right now I'm just resizing my brush tip, taking it down again. As I do this, I like to hover over the preview area of the image to kind of see the size there. Okay, so I think that'll work. And let's go ahead and bring down our density, kind of constraining the strength of this brush tip more towards the center, and I may want to kind of pull in this shoulder area just a little bit more right in there. Okay. All right, very good. Now let's go ahead and take our push left tool and just pulling down over here, we can kind of pull in a lot of that information right over there, repairing that odd little edge that we had. All right, very nice. The next thing I want to do is take my thaw mask tool. Let's go ahead and remove our entire mask. And this is where we want to look for any kind of odd pinching that's occurring in her body as a result of pulling all this information inward. If we see any, we can use our reconstruct tool right here. We'll go ahead and zoom in. And we can just kind of go over some areas that we feel like got pinched a little bit too much, got flattened down perhaps a little too much. I'm noticing it right here, just in the breast area. We can also increase our brush rate, basically the rate at which this reconstruction takes effect. And just any other little areas right there. I'm also noticing that I didn't dethaw that little spot right there completely. Okay. So just kind of coming back through, analyzing some different areas of the overall form. For the most part, everything looks pretty nice. I'm just looking at stuff like this where these lines right here kind of got squished a little bit too much, where they got pinched a little bit too much. But namely right here in the chest and this breast area, I don't want that to feel like it's sunken in or compressed. Okay, so just kind of going back through and kind of reconstructing some of that information. But overall, everything looks pretty nice. So once you're happy with that and you don't see any kind of weird pinched or folded areas of the form, we can go ahead and click OK. And let's go ahead and make a comparison really quick by turning off the visibility of our left side pull-in layer. All right, very nice. I'm liking how that's looking. So she feels just a lot more slimmed down than before. So just these past two manipulations that we've created with the waistline and the left side has made a huge difference in just the overall form of her body. Her body is now starting to match what we did to her face. So it's feeling pretty nice. Now what is really sticking out to me more so than ever is her right arm, or her screen left arm, basically right here. We really want to pull that in as well, okay? And we're going to want to also slim it down a little bit. It feels like it's not matching the body as much anymore because we've slimmed down pretty much everything in the rest of her body. So that arm of hers is really sticking out. We're going to spend a couple of lessons working on the arm. We're going to focus the next lesson on just positioning it accordingly. And then we'll go in and talk about how we can slim it down, how we can kind of maybe clone out some information right in here, just kind of where the arm meets the body and the dress. So there's going to be a few little things that we're going to want to do. One of the biggest challenges will be as we pull over the arm, making sure that we don't pinch in the neck too much to where it feels too thin or too slim down. So we'll kind of talk about how we can address this area right in here as well. So we're moving along very nicely. So we'll go ahead and start focusing on this area of the body in the next lesson. In this lesson, we'll focus on repositioning our model's right arm by pulling it in toward the body. So let's go ahead and get started. All right, so over the last couple of lessons, we've pretty much slimmed down a majority of our female model's body. Now, we still got a lot of work to do on the body itself, but we're on the right track. We want to kind of start slimming it down first and then start kind of fine-tuning and tweaking other attributes of the body later on in the course. So to just kind of make another quick comparison, we can turn off the visibility of our left side pull in, which is what we did in the previous lesson, pulling in that whole left side inward some, and then our waistline layer, where we basically kind of pulled in the waistline from both sides using the forward warp tool for both of these manipulations. So having done both of those, what really sticks out now is her right arm holding that martini glass. It feels like it sticks out a little bit far. She feels top heavy over here, and her arm also feels a little bit thick compared to the visual changes we've made in slimming down her body. Again, we're kind of pushing towards that idealized sense of beauty and perfection. All right. So with that said, let's make another merged copy by holding down Shift, Control, Alt, and E. And we'll go ahead and title this layer Right Arm Position. So we're going to position the right arm first, talk about a few little difficulties that'll come along the way in doing so. And then in our next lesson, we'll focus on slimming the arm down. So again, I like to have multiple merged copies because it makes changes a lot easier. We can also pull from any information from a previous state. So I like kind of having these significant changes in our photo manipulation process saved on different merged copy layers. So on this layer, with it selected, we'll go back into Liquify by going to Filter and then to Liquify. So the first thing I want to do, just as we've done with the previous two steps, is I want to take my Freeze Mask tool and I want to mask out any information that I do not want moved as I pull this arm holding the martini glass inward. The reason I'm masking out pretty much everything is I'm just being extra careful because I want to pull everything over very uniformly. And as a result, I'm going to take my forward warp tool and increase it significantly to where it's very large. And so I don't want to accidentally grab anything else. I also want my density at 100. Again, if it's at 100, I'm utilizing the full radius of this brush tip, and I can kind of pull everything over very uniformly like so. Now, here's a problem that we're running into. As we pull this arm over, you can see how we're pinching in the neck right there. You can see that gap. We want to talk about how we can easily rectify that because right now her neck looks extremely thin. Way too thin from what we really initially visualized from that second lesson where we were trying to slim down the neck some. Now let's go ahead and take our thaw mask and we'll go ahead and basically get rid of this entire masked out area. And of course, we've run into this before right here where the edge of the image is actually getting pulled in as well. We can use our push left tool and just pulling upward, you can pull that pixel information right back over. Okay. So we're just kind of zoom in here, hitting Control equals on our keyboard, and we'll kind of adjust our canvas. So at this point, I want to take my reconstruct tool, and I want to look for any kind of hard edges that may have been created. I kind of see one right here, and I may want to take down my brush rate just slightly to kind of blend this in as I kind of reconstruct it. And even with the dress, I want to make sure we didn't make any kind of changes to the dress as I pulled that arm over. Now right in here, we could attempt to use our forward warp tool to really clean up that spot. but I don't think it's going to work very effectively. We could try to come in, maybe bring down our density and try to fix that information. We'd have to really bring down our brush size significantly. Maybe that's too small, and try to pull it in, but it's just a little bit too difficult and painstaking to try and get that just right. We run the high risk of really messing up that straight edge of the martini glass, which is why I don't really want to try and attempt that here in Liquify. There's a much easier way that we can do that once we exit Liquify. But while we're still in Liquify, we can try to start and kind of slim down some different areas of her arm, kind of right here with the forearm, if we want to kind of pull in some of that as well, just using the forward warp tool. Maybe even on this inward side right here, just a little bit. Now for areas right here where the arm meets the torso, where we kind of have this area right here, we'll kind of talk about another way that we can do this in the next lesson. And this spot right here where we have the kind of the upper arm shoulder area, I probably won't want to try and pull that in inward in Liquify either. You could try to use your freeze mask tool, and you could try to kind of mask out this part of the arm and the martini glass if you want. And you could try to basically pull all of that in if you wanted to. But the problem that will arise, especially if we default, is you're going to get some weird little kind of edges right there along both the hand and the wrist. That kind of happens when you have a hard contrasting edge where you have two bodies like this, where you got the forearm and the upper arm overlapping. They're just two significant pieces where I really wouldn't recommend trying to do that here in Liquify. Let's go ahead and take a couple steps back there. Okay, so just zooming out and looking at this overall, I'm very happy with it. So let's go ahead and commit to these changes. Again, we're just focusing on the position of the arm. We'll go ahead and click OK. And now we want to focus on this area right here, where we've got that pinching in the neck. This is a great example of why I like to have multiple merged copies. So we'll go ahead and zoom in here. And using my eraser tool, I'm going to use a hard round brush. And in my brush panel, I'm going to check mark shape dynamics and make sure I have pen pressure for the control of my size jitter, leaving size jitter at 0. And I'm just going to come in here and erase away this information, thus revealing the neck that we have on the previous layer. Okay? So just kind of coming right along that martini glass. I find this just much easier to do than trying to do it in Liquify. All right, very good. And we can even kind of come over where the hair is right here and kind of bring that in as well. And as a result of having done this, the martini glass overlaps her neck. Okay, and that actually looks a lot better than it did originally, where you kind of have that faint little gap right there that's even in the original photo. And I don't really like that anyway. It kind of looks like a weird tangent where you have one body kind of slightly meeting another, coming right up to it without overlapping. And it's kind of a visual distraction that pulls your eye towards that spot. So that actually looks a lot better, having that martini glass overlap it. So very nice. Now what you can see is if you, with this layer still selected, you can hold down Alt and click on the eye icon. And that isolates the visibility of that layer where you can see that information that you erased away. Okay, so that just kind of shows you what you revealed underneath. Now, let's say this was the end of your photo manipulation process. You didn't have anything else you wanted to change. Just for argument's sake. Well, what you would probably want to do is go ahead and make another merged copy by hitting Shift Control Alt E. And that basically gives you a flattened merged copy of everything that we see here visually. And then I would go ahead and right click it and choose merge down. So now your right arm position layer, if you hit Alt again and click on the eye and isolate it, that information is filled in. It's all one flat layer. This would probably be a good idea, especially if you're going to, say, isolate this entire figure of the woman and separate it from the background and put a new background in. You don't have to worry about that background showing through the figure. So it's not really something you have to do. We are going to have additional steps where we have additional merged copies. It's something you could do if you wanted to. Just something to keep in mind that we did have information there that was missing. So in our next lesson, we're going to focus on basically slimming down this arm. Now, as I mentioned, there's an easier way to pull in this upper arm right here where it goes into the shoulder. Pull it inward to where it goes behind that martini glass. And we're going to talk about how we can very easily do that in the next lesson, as well as kind of slimming down this area right here where that upper arm meets the torso, and kind of how we can kind of redefine the overall shape right here, okay? Because right now the arm feels kind of wide, a little bit thick compared to really everything else that we've done thus far in kind of slimming down her body. So stick around, and in our next lesson, we'll tackle slimming down the right arm. In this lesson, we'll focus on slimming down our model's right arm now that we have repositioned it. So let's go ahead and get started. All right, so in the previous lesson, we basically took our female model's right arm and we pulled it inward just a little bit by going back into Liquify and using the forward warp tool. And we also talked about how we could rectify the issue of that neck getting pinched in as well. So what I want to do now is basically start to slim down the arm. Before we moved the arm over, you could see how it felt a little bit disproportionate, a little bit displaced. Now that we've moved it inward, it feels a little bit more balanced. It's added to the overall slimming effect of our model, but we still want to slim down the arm. I really feel like that will really add just so much more to what we're trying to achieve in pushing for that idealized sense of beauty and perfection. So let's go ahead and zoom in here by hitting Control equals on our keyboard. And as I mentioned in the previous lesson, I want to kind of pull in this upper part of the arm right here. I talked about how it would be a little bit difficult to try and mask out the forearm and then use the forward warp tool to try and pull that in. We kind of run the risk of still damaging the base of the martini glass as well as that edge of the forearm. And that kind of happens when you have a very defined edge that's masked out. Some of that information gets smeared or pulled. Think of this very, very much as the same thing that we dealt with in lesson two when we had that earring that was getting smeared. So what we can do is take our lasso tool and we'll kind of think of a different way of doing this. So I'm going to take my lasso tool, and on my right arm position layer, I'm going to make a selection around this upper arm, and you'll notice how I kind of came out pretty far out over here to the side, picking up some of that background information as well for this selection, and I'll kind of explain why here in a moment. Having made this selection around the upper arm right here that's kind of peeking out, we'll go ahead and right click and choose Layer via Copy. All right, great. The next thing I want to do is create a layer mask for this layer. And so you can do this by clicking on this little rectangle button in your layers panel. It has like a little circle in the center of the rectangle for the icon. And now let's go ahead, making sure we click on the thumbnail for that copied part of the arm, and using our move tool, go ahead and pull that inward just a little bit. All right, great. Now we want to click on our layer mask, and we want to grab our brush tool, and we want to switch from white to black. All right, great. And I'll go ahead and turn on shape dynamics. I'm just going to use a hard round brush. And basically, anything that we paint with black is going to reveal what's underneath this copied layer that we've kind of moved over. Now, if it makes it a little bit easier, you can reduce the opacity of this layer just a little bit, and then making sure you're still on the layer mask, you can start to paint over where you want that forearm to be visible. And so this makes it a lot easier, I think, than trying to do it in Liquify. And again, we can always switch back to white if we want to kind of rein in any specific areas. We can bring that back to 100%. Go ahead and switch to black right there. And it's kind of looking like we've got a little spot right there that we may have to actually clone out. But that's okay. Overall, we've done what we want to do. All right, great. So just kind of tidying up that little edge of the martini glass. Okay, so the next thing I want to go ahead and do is make a new layer. And I'll go ahead and title these layers in between lessons accordingly. So this new layer is where we're going to do a little bit of cloning. So we're going to grab our clone stamp tool, and I'm just going to use a hard round brush really quick. We'll turn on shape dynamics, making sure I got pen pressure for the size. We'll size it down considerably. And you want to make sure, again, that you have all layers set to the sample up in your control panel. And I'll go ahead and hold down Alt and sample from the background right there, and we'll kind of clean up that little spot right there. So it wasn't absolutely perfect, but overall, we were able to move it over very nicely. In fact, if we zoom out just really quick, you can see, if we go ahead and turn off the visibility of these two layers, how we're able to pull in that arm, kind of slimming down that side right there. Now, one thing I'm noticing is the reflection in the martini glass. It looks a little bit weird having that flesh color right in there. That martini glass is kind of translucent, and yeah, it kind of distorts a little bit of what's underneath. But what we may do, and this will be just a very subtle change, is I'll kind of bring in just a little bit of that background right there. Okay, it doesn't have to be absolutely perfect. It doesn't really need to line up with the arm itself. But I think just having just a little bit of background kind of showing through right there, it's a real subtle thing, but I think it helps. Okay, very nice. Now let's go ahead and kind of talk about this area over here. We want to kind of slim it in as well. So I'm just going to hold down Alt and sample from the background here. And I'll kind of start to just kind of trim in this side of the arm as well. And again, I like to have this cloned information on its own layer. That way, if we were to have done it on the right arm position layer, the layer where we reposition the arm, and then we saved and closed out the file, we come back and we realize, whoa, I slimmed that arm way down too much. It's way too thin. Well, then you have a problem. You can't undo it. You're going to have to go back and actually reposition the arm all over again and then do your cloned information. So I like to keep this kind of stuff on its own layer. So what I'm doing now is I'm kind of rethinking this area right in here where the arm kind of meets the torso. And basically, I'm just kind of cloning some information, kind of rebuilding this part of the dress as it comes around. And I'm kind of zooming in and out as I do this to kind of make some comparisons. So we can kind of start to see how that's looking. So let's make a quick comparison really quick. So I feel like that feels a lot nicer. Her arm isn't as thick right there as before. And we just kind of have a little bit more of the outline of the backside of her body. So just kind of doing this also aids with just kind of the slimming down of her body. We're kind of seeing more of kind of the contour of her side right there. Again, kind of a subtle change, but I think it helps. I'm also noticing that we've got some issues right here just with some kind of folding of the skin. We're going to want to kind of rectify some of that as well, and maybe even kind of adjust the kind of the shadow that we have right in here as well later on, just to kind of add to the illusion of this kind of wrapping around a little bit better. Right now, it feels very wide right in here. And we may address that after we kind of focus on making some changes to the chest, because that's really the one major thing left for her whole body, is that her chest feels like it's drooping. It also feels way too large. Her breasts feel very large. And so we want to kind of shrink them down, kind of maybe lift them up a little bit, and kind of maybe reshape them slightly, because they really don't feel like they fit her body. Okay, so we'll be kind of focusing on that actually in the next lesson. Okay, so that's feeling pretty nice. We can go ahead and kind of continue to kind of make some comparisons there. But overall, really nice. We've made some great changes to the arm, pulling it over and then just slimming it down. In our next lesson, we're going to go ahead and kind of focus on kind of cleaning up just kind of the area around the chest area right in here, kind of reshaping the breasts, and just as I mentioned, kind of pushing them up, and this armpit area as well eventually. So stick around and we'll see you then. In this lesson, we'll focus on reshaping the chest area of our female model. So let's go ahead and get started. All right, so in the previous lesson, we basically wrapped up with the slimming of her right arm. And if you look over here in our layers panel, I've got a group which I've created and titled Right Arm Adjust. So if we look within that group, you can see the different layers that we have for not only the reshaping, but the repositioning of that right arm. So having done that, the thing that really sticks out to me now is her breasts, or her chest area, if you will. They feel overly large compared to all of the other manipulations that we've done on the body thus far. And so if you look over here again in the layers panel, I've created another merged copy, which I've titled chest. And so that's what we're going to be focusing on now. Basically, what I want to do is reduce the size of the breasts, kind of push them upward a little bit, because I kind of feel like they're probably sagging somewhat, and then just kind of reshape them overall. Right now they feel just kind of a little bit overly full as well. I want to kind of peel back some of the weight to them by just kind of adjusting the outer contour of this left breast, as well as maybe kind of adjusting how these lines right here in the dress on the right side kind of fall over that breast as well, and even that seam right there. So let's jump back into Liquify by going to Filter, Liquify, and we'll zoom in here. So the first thing I really want to do before we start manipulating anything in the chest area is I want to take my Freeze Mask tool, and I'm just going to mask out some of these surrounding areas that I do not want affected. Okay, great. Next, I want to go ahead and take my pucker tool. So the pucker tool, again, it's basically pulling pixels inward. And so I'm taking up my brush size just a little bit there, and I want to leave the brush density at 100. So I can really make full use of the entire radius of this brush. I want to try to pull everything down very uniformly at first. And of course, I want to leave the brush rate pretty low, because I don't want it to happen super fast. This will give me a little bit more control. Okay, great. So we've shrunken them down pretty significantly at this point. Now, we did get a little bit of that arm right there. But we can fix that very easily later on using our forward warp tool. Okay, now what I want to go ahead and do is take my forward warp tool. Let's take up the brush size considerably, and we'll bring up the density as well all the way to 100. And I just want to kind of pull these breasts upward just a little bit more. Again, I kind of felt like they were kind of drooping. And so if we're making them lighter and smaller, I don't feel like they're going to be as heavy. They're not going to fall down as low. Okay, great. Now let's go ahead and take our thaw mask tool. I think it's safe to kind of de-thaw everything. And I've got some areas around the breast that I want to kind of start reshaping, and then we'll focus on the breast itself. And we'll take our forward warp tool here. We'll bring down the brush size quite a bit there. And let's take down the density some. And I'll go ahead and kind of focus on this arm right here. I basically want to kind of clean up that distortion that we had right there. Just kind of zooming out. Okay, that's looking a lot better. Okay, let's go ahead now and kind of start to pull in this area right here of the breast. I want to kind of shoot for kind of that teardrop kind of shape. Again, kind of pulling off some of the weight. And while I do that, I'm going to kind of reshape that shoulder just a little bit right there as well. Now, one thing I'm noticing, and this is apparently from the dress itself, we've got this weird little dip right there. I kind of want to even that out just a little bit more. I think by doing that, that'll really help add to the having a better form to that left breast. And then let's go ahead and kind of pull out this bottom area just a little bit more too. So basically kind of focusing on the outer contour or edge, if you will, of this breast right here, her left breast. All right, so that's already starting to feel much, much better. So just kind of pulling that part right there, pulling it down, pulling it inward. And basically in doing so, we're really peeling off a lot of weight right there. It's not feeling like it's pushed out so much. It doesn't feel as large or as heavy. All right, so that's feeling pretty nice. Now let's kind of jump over here to the opposite side. And what I want to do is probably first focus on this area right here. Again, thinking about reshaping this right breast, it all feels kind of like one mass right here. Just this whole side of the chest. And so we want to kind of make somewhat of a better transition from this area to this area. So I think I'm going to go ahead and try out my bloat tool. And we'll go ahead, probably take down the brush size just a little bit. Take up the density just slightly. Actually, let's go ahead and take the brush up just a little bit more. All right, so just kind of a quick, subtle change right there. So we've added a little bit more of form and curvature right there, trying to kind of round it out a little bit better, kind of just want to define this area just a little bit more clearly. And let's go ahead and jump back to our forward warp tool. And I want to kind of adjust this seam right here to where it feels like it kind of falls over that breast a little bit more clearly. That's already feeling a million times better. Now this area over here, I want to kind of tuck it in just a little bit more. Have it hug that part of the body just a little bit more tightly. And in doing so, I think it'll help kind of establish this form a little bit more clearly. So kind of pulling it inward, kind of right there. So you can kind of start to see how I'm kind of redefining the overall shape right there. So for an area like this, it just kind of takes a little bit of experimenting. You may want to look at some other images of some other models that have a smaller chest area and kind of shoot for a similar shape from one of those. But overall, that's feeling really nice. Let's go ahead, just zooming in and out, kind of making comparisons here. I think it's safe for me to go ahead and probably commit to these changes
Probably one more thing I'll do is maybe right in here. I might kind of pull this area up just a little bit more. Okay, now let's go ahead and hit OK. And let's make a comparison now. So that's feeling a million times better, I think. I feel like these manipulations and adjustments that we've made fit the other manipulations that we've also applied to the body. So just kind of making that comparison by turning on and off the visibility of our chest layer, you can see what a difference that makes. They feel just like they fit the body a lot more. So again, basically what we did is we reduced the overall size using the pucker tool. We used the forward warp tool to kind of push them up so they don't sag as much. And then we just kind of pulled in some of these different areas, trying to adjust the overall contour and shape of her chest area. And so what we can do now is just do a little bit of additional cleanup on her chest. I can go ahead and make a new layer, and just using my clone stamp tool, again making sure I have it set to all layers, I can kind of come around and just holding down Alt, and we'll go ahead and kind of reduce the size there just a little bit. We can kind of clean up any areas right here even further, just with a little bit more precision. That's looking pretty nice. And then just kind of right over here as well. Just kind of cleaning up the edge of that shoulder just slightly. All right. Looking really good. Just kind of comparing that just slightly. All right, great. So the next thing we're going to focus on, again, we're still pushing for that idealized sense of beauty and perfection, is we're going to start to kind of analyze the body more holistically now. And in doing so, we can start to kind of see smaller areas that we really want to kind of start tweaking even further. So having reshaped these breasts right here, this armpit area is really starting to stick out and become even more prominent than ever. It feels a little bit off. Now, moments ago, we kind of pulled this area inward just a little bit, again, trying to really establish this form. What I want to do in the armpit is kind of clean up this weird little fold area right here, where you kind of have a little bit of fat that's kind of being pushed together. And so we want to kind of clean that up and then maybe kind of redefine that shadow just so we can have a stronger sense of that part of the body kind of wrapping around. And I really think that'll kind of complement what we've already done right here. So that's what we're going to focus on in the next lesson, is basically cleaning up her armpit area. So stick around and we'll go ahead and tackle that in our next lesson. In this lesson, we'll focus on cleaning up the right armpit area of our models. So let's go ahead and get started. All right, so in the previous lesson, we pretty much resized and reshaped her chest area by using the pucker tool in Liquify to shrink down both of her breasts, and then using the forward warp tool, we were able to kind of push them up a little bit and then just kind of reshape the overall contours of those breasts so that they feel like they fit the body just a little bit more, especially having made all of these different manipulations to the rest of her form. They feel like it fits, again, just a lot more appropriately. So we can go ahead and make another comparison really quick, and you can see basically what I'm talking about. This feels like they're shaped a little bit better, and they fit the body much more nicely than before. So having done all this, the area that's really starting to stick out to me now is the armpit area. And this is an area that I noticed when we were working on the arm. We have that weird little fold in the skin now that really stands out, kind of a fatty area right there. And so I want to kind of clean that up and make it a little bit more kind of uniform. And then once we do that, I also want to think about this shadow. Now that we've kind of pinched in and pulled in the body, I also want to think about the shadow right here. I think if we kind of increase it, it'll kind of allow us to create the illusion that that part of the body is wrapping around just a lot more. I think it'll complement what we've done down here. So before we get started, you'll notice over here in the layers panel, I went ahead and grouped both of those layers associated with the chest. And let's go ahead and make a new layer. And this time I'm going to go ahead and use the healing brush tool. So let's zoom in here, hitting Control equals on our keyboard. So the healing brush tool, we've used it earlier in the course, and it pretty much works like the clone stamp tool in that you're able to sample pixels from a different area and apply them to another area. However, the healing brush tool also matches the texture, the lighting, the transparency, and even the shading of the sampled pixels to the pixels that are being healed. And so this particular tool works very nicely in areas where you kind of have a higher contrast in your darks and your lights. So just right here in the armpit area, we've got some darker values, and I may want to kind of pull from this midtone value and start to kind of pull it into some of these darker areas to help clean it up. This should work pretty nicely. So I'm going to hold down Alt and just sample from right about here. And at first, as we begin to paint, it doesn't look like it's working at all, but when we release, you can see how it's starting to kind of heal up that area. And so as I do this, I'm kind of working my way outward to kind of make a nice, smooth transition, and I'm sampling repeatedly as I do this. And we can always right-click. We can come in and resize the brush tip. I also have the hardness pulled down considerably so that it's a very soft, round brush. And I think that really does help in kind of weaving in these pixels into the area that we're trying to heal. Let's zoom out now. I can already see we've made a huge difference. I'll go ahead and make a quick comparison here by turning on and off the visibility of that layer that we're cloning on. We're basically using our healing brush. And again, just like the clone stamp tool, you want to make sure that you have all layers turned on up here in the control panel next to where it says sample. If you leave it set to current layer, then it's not going to work because there's nothing that's on this new layer that we've created initially. Okay, so overall it's feeling pretty nice. What I want to go ahead and do now is create a new layer, and I want to think about this shadow now. So let's grab our brush tool, and I'm going to go ahead and right click, and I'm just going to choose this soft round brush. Again, these are just default brushes that come stocked with Photoshop. And let's go ahead and increase the size just a little bit here. So I think that'll work. And then I want to jump to my brush panel. And let's go ahead and turn on transfer. And just as before, I want to have pen pressure enabled for both controls for opacity and flow. And of course, these are also allow you to control the jitter. I just want to leave both of those at 0%. So you've probably noticed that earlier that I left those both at 0. Okay, so with our brush tool using a soft hard round brush, or a soft round brush, we'll go ahead and kind of sample from kind of a darker area right here. And I want to start to kind of paint this shadow. Now, you'll notice that when I do this, I'm actually starting to cover up a lot of texture, a lot of those, little pores in the skin, and I don't really want to do that. So what I want to do is probably change the blend mode for this layer. We might want to try something like, we could try and see what overlay does. We can also see what multiply does. It's kind of, you want to just kind of go through and experiment with some of these different blend modes to see what they do. Multiply actually may not be that bad. Of course, we may want to reduce the opacity of this layer considerably, maybe about halfway. And then I'll kind of start to paint in this shadow. And so what I'm doing is I'm basically kind of trying to push that shadow so that it feels like that part of the body just kind of wraps around, is more rounded than before. Earlier, it felt more just kind of like a wider mass right there. And this is also something I mentioned in the previous lesson. When I'm reshaping this breast right here, it all felt like just kind of one big mass right here. We want more form and definition. And so by just kind of adding that shadow right there, it's really complementing what we've already done, not just with this right breast, but also with this arm. So just kind of coming around both areas. And again, I've just kind of sampled directly from the image. And at this point, you can even take an eraser with a soft round brush. Again, I'll turn on transfer, making sure I have pen pressure for both opacity and flow. And we can kind of rein in some areas, just kind of lightly applying that eraser. But overall, that feels much, much better. Pretty nice. All right, great. So we're making a lot of progress with our photo manipulation. And now that we've basically kind of adjusted a shadow on the body, kind of put that shadow in there, I'm starting to really think about other areas where I may want to kind of push a shadow even further. And an area that's actually kind of been sticking out to me is this spot right here on her tummy area. Again, if you recall, we've kind of pulled in the body and her belly isn't sticking out. It's not as rounded as it was, say, in the original. And so I'm thinking that this highlight right here won't be as prominent, okay? It's not sticking outward. It's not catching that light probably as strongly as it was right here in the original, okay? Because we've made it just a little bit more vertical. And I'm kind of feeling like we've also had this sash right here that kind of comes outward just a little bit. And I feel like now that we've kind of pulled the tummy in, it may be also kind of sitting just slightly behind that sash. So we may want to pull in a little bit of shadow over that area as well. And I think in doing so, it'll just help improve this overall area right in here as we continue to really redefine it. So I'm going to focus on that in our next lesson. So stick around and we'll catch you then. In this lesson, we'll focus on reducing the intensity of a highlight on the stomach area of our model's dress by painting in a shadow. So let's go ahead and get started. All right. So in the previous lesson, we focused on her armpit area. If you recall, we had this kind of odd fold in the skin. And so what we did is we used the healing brush tool to make it appear more seamless, and then we painted in a shadow just by sampling a darker color right there, a darker value, and then using a blend mode, we were able to weave it in effectively. So again, the reasoning for this is we wanted that part of the body to feel like it wraps around much more clearly. And if you think about it, this really does make sense, because when we had that protruding fold in the skin, it was picking up the light from the light source much more easily. But having removed it, it would make sense to maybe push that shadow right there a little bit more, just so the body wraps around. If there's no fold right there, it's going to wrap around more, and thus light isn't going to hit it as clearly. You'll also notice in between lessons, I went ahead and named both of those layers associated with the armpit accordingly. We have armpit repair and then armpit shadow. So thinking about shadows, you'll also recall that I mentioned at the end of the previous lesson, this tummy area right here where we have this highlight, which I kind of find just a little bit distracting. Here's why. If we go back to the original image, you can see that her stomach protrudes outward. Think of it coming towards us as the viewer much more than it does now, having basically pinched it in, pulled it in, and thinned it down. So at this point, think of the stomach as being sucked in more, okay? So as a result, I don't think it's going to pick up that highlight as much as it did when it was sticking outward. where it was catching that light source. If it's pulled in more, it's being kind of masked more by this arm and especially by this sash right here that's hanging down. So what I want to go ahead and do is just create a new layer, and I'm going to title this layer Stomach Shadow Paint. And we'll just go ahead and grab our brush tool. I'm going to right click, bringing up our brush preset picker. I'm just going to grab a default soft round brush, and we'll go ahead and size that brush preset up. And I'll jump into my brush panel. I'm going to turn on transfer. And for transfer, I want to make sure I have pen pressure enabled for both controls of opacity and flow. I'm using a Wacom stylus, and so I like having that setting because I feel like I have just a nice amount of control to really control the opacity and flow based off of how much pressure I apply to my Cintiq. Now, if you feel more comfortable manually coming up here and adjusting the opacity and flow without doing all that while using your soft round brush, feel free to do so. So I'm just going to go ahead and sample from kind of a darker area. And then I'm just going to lightly apply pressure as I begin to work in this shadow. And so just zooming out, that's feeling much, much nicer. Now I am going to leave a little bit of the highlight just right up here, okay? I basically want to create the illusion that this area right here just kind of comes in a little bit more. And I just feel like it would have a shadow cast over it, especially from the sash. Now, thinking about the sash, I feel like we could define it just a little bit more clearly. We can see this part of the sash right here. There's two strips hanging down. This strip right here, I feel like we can see it, we understand it visually, but this one right here, not so much. So what I might do, still using my brush tool, I'm going to switch to a hard round brush, and in my brush panel, I'm going to turn on shape dynamics, making sure I have pen pressure enabled for the control of the size, and then I'm going to reduce the overall size for my brush preset. And we'll just zoom in here. And since this is pretty much a flat color right here for the background that we see right here through the dress, I'm just going to sample it. Might reduce that a little bit more. And I'm just going to kind of weave it up into that area right there, where you can kind of see that back kind of lit area, what appears to be almost like a backlit area of the sash. I think basically by just kind of pulling in some more of this background information, we can kind of define that sash a little bit more clearly just by seeing the tip of it. So that feels much more nice, much nicer basically. Feels like it reads just a little bit more visually clear. So again, let's go ahead and just make another comparison. And so I really think this adds to the overall appearance that we're trying to really trying to convey and ultimately manipulate with our entire model. Her stomach feels like it just it feels a lot more thin, and it feels like it just makes more sense visually. Now, still thinking about the stomach, you may want to draw your attention now to these folds over here on the right side of her abdomen area. And this is an area that I mentioned earlier on in the course when we were pulling in the waist, pulling it inward. I talked about how we really want to remove these folds later on. This is because it kind of still creates the illusion that that part of her stomach is pushing outward, okay? And so I think by removing those folds, we'll be able to really remove any kind of sense of that. And so this will be kind of tricky because we have stripes on the dress, okay? If this were a solid dress, it would be cake. We could easily clone out that information, no problem at all. So in our next lesson, we're going to focus on how we could do this, a couple of things that we can do to really kind of make this area feel a little bit more seamless while also maintaining the illusion that it's not perfectly skin tight, that the dress is still kind of hanging on her body right there. So we're going to tackle that in our next lesson, so stick around. In this lesson, we'll focus on how we can remove some of the folds on our model's dress. So let's go ahead and get started. All right. So towards the end of the previous lesson, I brought our attention back to these folds right here on our female model's dress. This is something that I mentioned early on in the course when we were slimming down the midsection, the waist area, if you will, of our model. So basically, these folds create the illusion that part of her midsection is kind of poking out through the dress. And so what I would like to do is basically remove a majority of these folds to where it doesn't feel like that. Now, if this were a solid color dress, meaning there were no lines, this would be very, very easy because we could just use some of our different cloning tools to sample and just cover up that type of information. However, we have these lines, and so we want to be mindful of keeping those lines consistent. We don't want them all going different directions. That would just create a lot of visual confusion that would ultimately be very distracting for the entire piece. So there's a couple of ways that we can go about doing this. It's kind of a process of not just using Liquify, but also using Free Transform to really take a piece of this dress and patch it over these folds and keeping those lines consistent and flowing into one another. So what I would like to do is go back to our original image, okay? And on our original layer, I want to take my lasso tool, and I'm going to draw a selection around this area right here, which is pretty close to the areas that we want to get rid of some of these folds. Once we've done this, I'm going to right-click within the selection and go to Layer via Copy. So what this does is it takes that piece and puts it on its own layer. And I'm going to pull it back towards the top of the stack, and I'll bring all my other layers back to being visible. The reason I'm pulling from the original image is because at this point in the process of this photo manipulation, I've already kind of moved and pinched and pushed around a majority of this dress kind of right in this area. And so I want to kind of refrain from doing that too much more, because at some point you do lose a little bit of quality. Okay, at this point, if there is a little bit of quality loss, it's not very much. It's nothing that anybody would ever notice. So for good measure, I'm just pulling from the original. And that's why we don't make all of these changes on the original photo, because again, you may want to pull from it, or you may want to pull from some of these other stages in your process as well. So that's why I like to kind of keep these merged copies as we go. All right, so taking this piece, what I'm going to do is hit Control-T on my keyboard and free transform it. And we're going to move it around. We can rotate it. And basically my focus now is to kind of start matching these lines up as best as I can. Once I've kind of rotated it and positioned it pretty close to where I want, I can right-click within the selection again while still in free transform mode and choose Warp. And this gives us kind of a little mesh that we can kind of pull in different areas and begin to kind of bend and skew this piece to our liking. And so that's what I'm pretty well doing now. Now, I'm not worried about this patched piece being absolutely 100% perfect. It doesn't have to be. I just want to make sure that these lines line up nicely and that our lights and our darks are fairly consistent as well. I'm not going for the whole look and feel of this part of her dress being skin tight like it's painted on her. That's not a worry of mine. It's okay if we have a little bit of variation, kind of like what you already see in some parts of the dress. We just want to kind of make it to where your eye isn't immediately drawn to the dress in that area because of some sort of odd kind of distraction, meaning if the lines were very inconsistent or if the lighting and the shadows was completely off. That's basically what I'm getting at. And so, in my opinion, free transforming this will get you probably part of the way. The other part will be going back into Liquify, which is what we're about to do. But overall, I'm pretty satisfied with how everything is lining up. I'm going to go ahead and commit to this change by going to our check mark right there on the control panel. Okay. Now, obviously, we have some hard edges right there. Don't worry about that just yet. Stuff like that we're going to rectify in the following lesson, where we'll use a clone stamp tool as well as a soft round brush for our eraser to start weaving everything into the rest of the dress. But really quick, let's go into Liquify by going to Filter and then Liquify. All right. Now, at this point, you may just be seeing only that piece by itself here in Liquify. If that is the case, you want to come over here to the screen right of your Liquify dialog box, and you want to make sure that Show Backdrop is check marked. And so with Show Backdrop check marked, you'll be able to see the entire image, basically everything else underneath. You also want to go ahead and take your backdrop mode right here and set it to behind. That way it's beneath what you're trying to manipulate, which is this patch here in Liquify, okay? All right. So I'm going to use my forward warp tool, and I'm pretty satisfied actually with the settings that we have over here. And so I can kind of start to kind of pull and move around some of these different areas, just further lining up these lines and just kind of bending them or skewing them as a whole just a little bit more so that they all kind of follow one another, and it kind of goes out into this kind of from this slightly tighter area out into the looser area of the dress. So I kind of find it using both Free Transform and Liquify just kind of gives me a roundabout nice sense of control. Free Transform really helps me kind of get a lot of the positioning out of the way and everything kind of lining up, and then Liquify kind of lets me fine-tune it and tweak it if need be. Overall, everything seems to be kind of coming together fairly nicely, though. So I'm actually pretty happy with that. Let's go ahead and click OK. And again, I'm trying to kind of make sure that this overall highlighted area right here is pretty consistent as we move down, as well as kind of these mid-tone, kind of darker values remain fairly consistent as well. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is kind of focus on this area right here. I'd like to kind of remove some of these folds, perhaps not all of them, but maybe just a few right here. I kind of like this one that comes across right there, just kind of right here across, kind of across the top right there. I might keep that one. So let's go back to our original photo, and I'll go ahead and make a selection. Actually, not over that, but right beneath it. Again, trying to choose an area that's pretty close. And just like before, we'll do a layer via copy. I'll pull that to the top of my stack, and we'll free transform it. We might want to resize it just a little bit and just kind of rotate it. So, you know, I had to do a little bit of resizing just because the overall lines did get kind of pinched a little bit when we were kind of thinning down the waist, but that's okay. Again, it's a subtle thing that is not going to really ultimately be distracting when you look at the entire piece as a whole. So right now I'm just kind of lining these up as best I can. And you can also kind of pull on those little handles as well if you want to. think we're almost there. That's feeling pretty nice. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and click the check mark there in our control panel to commit to that. Let's jump back into Liquify. And we're going to go Liquify right there. And we'll zoom in. And again, I'll be using my forward warp tool right there just to kind of further kind of move around some of these different pieces, getting them just the way I want. So I want them to be pretty close as possible because it'll just make it a lot easier when we start to kind of weave these together into the dress by kind of fading out the edges as well as doing a lot of cloning. All right, so overall, I think that's looking pretty good. I feel like everything's kind of coming together. I'm going to click OK, so you can kind of see what we've done here. And we'll zoom out some more too. So looking at this a little bit further away, yeah, it still looks rough, but you can already see we're well on our way to kind of creating the illusion that her tummy area isn't poking out right there. And that's the ultimate goal with what we're trying to do. So in our next lesson, what we're going to do is start kind of blending these in. We're going to be using our eraser tool as well as our clone stamp. And we're going to start kind of going through a lot of these lines right here, just kind of starting to weave them in by sampling. And we'll start to make it feel just a lot more cohesive as a whole right there for that section of her dress. So stick around and we're going to tackle that in our next lesson. In this lesson, we'll focus on blending in the two patches on our model's dress. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so we're going to pick right back up where we left off. Basically, we're wanting to take these two patches that we've placed on our model's dress and begin to blend them in, weave them in. The goal here, once again, is to cover up these folds that we see right here in her dress in the midsection, because it gives the appearance that her tummy area right there is kind of pushing outwards. And so we want to basically kind of remove all sense of that. In between lessons, I went ahead as well and renamed those two patches accordingly as patch 1 and patch 2. So the first thing I want to go ahead and do is for each one of these patches, I want to take my eraser tool and just using a soft round brush with transfer enabled, I want to kind of come around and kind of remove some of these hard edges. So we'll start with patch 2 right here, which is the lower patch. And I'm just kind of very lightly coming around the edges and softening up those the hard edges that we have right here for each one of these patches. And I'll kind of do the same thing just kind of right here on these sides as well. Okay, and then we'll go up here to patch 1. And we'll kind of come around the bottom edge of that one. And you can already see how it's starting to integrate into the rest of the dress. So just very softly applying a little bit of pressure. Now again, I kind of mentioned how I want to keep that little fold right there. I kind of like how it looks just because it feels very natural as it comes off of this one right here, that really adds to the sense of the dress wrapping around the body. So I want to keep that one in there. Okay, excellent. Let's go ahead and make a new layer. And on this layer, we're going to use our clone stamp tool to begin just weaving in these two patches much more appropriately into the rest of the dress, so it all kind of flows together more cohesively. So for our clone stamp, I'm going to right click and bringing up our brush preset picker. Let's go with a soft round brush. We'll go ahead and size it up just a little bit. And we'll go ahead and turn on transfer once again, making sure I got pen pressure for both opacity and flow. And I want to just kind of start to come through and remove any kind of weird little inconsistencies. Now, again, it's okay to have a little bit of variety. Everything doesn't have to be absolutely perfect, absolutely seamless. It's okay to have some variety because it'll still make the dress feel natural. But just here and there, some little inconsistencies that I want to kind of clean up. And as I do this periodically, I want to kind of zoom out just to kind of see everything very holistically. And along the way, it's always good to kind of make comparisons as well. So kind of cleaning up that little spot right there, I feel like was pretty nice. And then just along the way, other little spots that we may want to kind of rectify. And that's feeling pretty good right there. Just kind of cleaning up a little bit of that information. So as I kind of move down these lines, I'm also trying to be mindful of just making sure that the values that we have going kind of from dark to light to that highlighted area right there in the center, everything feels very consistent. Nothing feels, really hard or contrasting or out of place, basically. So just you want to kind of maintain that, be aware of that. And so down in here, kind of towards the bottom, this is where I want to kind of have everything kind of flow in together a little bit better. And so by having my brush set to transfer, I can kind of softly kind of weave that in. And just zooming out, that's feeling pretty nice. Now I'm already starting to notice something else that's starting to come to my attention as we weave all of this together. And it's the overall highlight that we have right here in the center. So if you recall, we'll go ahead and kind of turn off some of these layers here. If you recall, when we went back to that original image and we sampled and took that piece from right here, well, this piece right here, this section, has a pretty strong highlight right here compared to an area down here, which is not as bright. And so we pulled from that section for both patches. And as a result, that highlight is pretty much extended a lot stronger. We may want to kind of tone it down just a little bit here and there. So we may want to go and do that just here momentarily. But basically just kind of coming along these different lines here and just further kind of helping weave them in together. So it's feeling pretty nice. May want to work in a little bit of that mid-tone value just right in there, just a little bit more. And that's feeling pretty good. Now, while we're at this, we could even come along other parts of the dress if you wanted to. I'm kind of seeing a weird little shadow band right here. We could come along and even clean that up just on the right breast area. So again, just kind of seeing some other areas that kind of come to my attention that I may want to kind of touch up there. But overall, that's feeling pretty nice. The next thing I want to go ahead and do is make another layer. And I kind of mentioned how I want to kind of tone down that highlight just a little bit. Looking at everything as a whole, it feels perhaps a little too strong, a little bit too close to this highlight right here on her right breast. So I'm going to take my brush tool. We're going to use a soft round brush, size it up, just maybe a little bit more. and I'm going to kind of paint over this whole area, but I want to go ahead and change my blend mode to something like multiply. That way I'm still kind of preserving the little intricate textures that you kind of see here and there. So just kind of toning that down overall, and then I'll take my eraser tool and maybe erase away just a little bit, kind of right there where that original kind of brighter point of that highlight was. And so overall, that's feeling much, much nicer. It's feeling, if we go ahead and make one big comparison here, that feels way better than this. So no longer does her midsection feel like it's popping through, poking out. So that's kind of how we can rectify something like that, where you've got a lot of lines in the dress and you really want to maintain those as best as you can without it being a visual distraction where your eye instantly gravitates towards it. So by keeping those lines consistent, we can look at this image as a whole and never even think about that area as having anything wrong with it, because everything is very consistent and it flows off the body very nicely. So in our next lesson, we're going to kind of start the process of just kind of working all over the entire form now, just touching up little areas, painting in little areas here and there, just little final touches to really kind of push this entire piece to completion here. I'm already noticing just little things here and there, a few stray hairs that we have missed on the head up here. May want to go ahead and kind of clone those out. A few other areas where I may want to kind of push a shadow here and there. Just any little areas, just overall that we may want to clean up. Even these seams right here. So these little seams, I may want to do a little bit of painting, just very subtle like, to kind of clean up some of those seams as well. So just from here on out, it'll be little bitty tweaks that we're going to address. So stick around and we'll catch you in our next lesson as we do that. In this lesson, we'll focus on adding final touch-ups to our model. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so we've come a long way at this point in manipulating our model's body. So I just want to make one big comparison to see where we've come thus far. And you can see we've made quite the change to her overall appearance. And so at this point, I just want to kind of work around the entire body. I'm just looking for any final things that I want to tweak. So you'll notice that I've started with a new merged copy, which I've titled Final Touch-Ups. So since we just came off of working on the dress, there may be a few things on the dress that I want to kind of touch up or clean up. So I'm going to go back into Liquify. We'll zoom in here just a little bit. And so overall, I'm pretty happy with how the dress is looking. Even at this point, I may still want to use like the bloat tool, for example. And I may want to just kind of adjust the overall flow and look and feel of those lines as they kind of come down. I kind of felt like we could maybe have lost a little bit of form just in there, just slightly. And so I kind of feel like just using the bloat tool there kind of helps even everything out just a little bit more. And so yeah, that was just kind of a real quick tweak right there. Another spot that's kind of starting to bug me is right here. Overall, I'm pretty happy with this section, but I'm kind of feeling like I want to revisit this spot right here where we have the top part of the dress. I want to kind of maybe pull this part in or maybe round it down just a little bit more to strengthen that the dress is indeed kind of wrapping around that section. Before I do this, though, I may want to kind of freeze mask that part of the arm. And using my forward warp tool, we'll go ahead and kind of adjust this particular section to where it just kind of comes in just a little bit more. So that's already starting to feel a lot better. And just kind of cleaning up that little spot right there. And this spot's pretty easy because it's mostly in shadow. So it's kind of easy to move around and just kind of, really, you're just adjusting the overall shape. I'm not worried about any kind of lines or anything like that, like we had to deal with in the previous lesson. Okay, so that's just feeling a little bit better. We'll go ahead and commit to those changes. So jumping around again, looking at her chest area, I kind of feel like now that we reshaped, resized her breast, I think we could probably maybe push the shadow right here in this midsection, maybe making it a little bit stronger. Seeing how we kind of pushed them up and just kind of reshaped them, I kind of feel like it could be a little bit stronger. So probably what I would like to do is go into quick mask mode. So I'm going to grab my brush and then I'm going to click on this button right here, and we'll use a hard round brush, and I'll turn on shape dynamics as well. And let's size down our overall brush tip. And so the quick mask feature lets you paint where you want your selection to be. And so that's basically what I'm doing right now. And I want to kind of push the overall shadow right in here. And so I want to have this area basically masked to where I don't have to worry about affecting anything else as I paint this shadow. So you'll kind of get a sense of where I'm going with this here in just a moment. And you could take your paint bucket tool and fill the rest of that in. Kind of gave me a little bit of a little ghosted line right there, but that's no big deal. I'll just clean that up. Okay, very good. So just zooming out here, we can see the area that we're going to be focusing on. I'll go ahead and click on that button again to exit quick mask mode. Now what I'm seeing here is everything is create a selection outside of everywhere that I painted. So all I got to go ahead and do is go to select and then choose inverse, or you can hit Shift Control I on your keyboard. So there, my selection is contained now to that specific area. Okay, great. And what I want to do is create a layer mask. So I'll go ahead and click on this button right here in my layers panel. And now I'm going to create an actual new layer. I'm going to pull that mask up for that layer. Okay, excellent. So you can see that little white spot right there. That's basically the area that anything that we do will be confined to that little section. And you want to make sure you click on the actual thumbnail for your layer and not the mask itself. And we're going to basically kind of treat this pretty similar to how we did the armpit area. I'm going to sample kind of a dark area. I may actually want to kind of sample from right here. I kind of like that spot. And I'm going to set this layer to multiply. And I think that'll allow us to weave in the shadow pretty nicely. Now right now it's set to a hard round brush. I'm going to switch to a soft round brush and turn on transfer. And we'll start to kind of work in this shadow. Now you may see a little bit of that hard edge. We're not going to utilize the whole entire selection. But I'm just kind of using that area to kind of confine my painting to with a little bit more ease. I can then take my eraser, which is using a soft round brush, and start to kind of rein some of that in. So just kind of pushing this little shadow area just a little bit more. Now there's still some spots that I may want to kind of push further on a separate layer using the clone stamp. So just kind of reining some of that in, just very, very subtle. It doesn't have to be a real dramatic kind of shadow, but just something kind of subtle. And you can always play around with other blend modes to kind of see what they give you. But I think I'm going to end up going with multiply ultimately. Feel like that's working pretty nicely. Okay, great. I'm going to go ahead and make another layer now. And for this layer, we'll do a lot of cloning, a lot of cleanup. So I'm going to switch back to my clone stamp. And for my clone stamp, I'll go ahead and use a hard round brush. And I'm going to kind of continue to focus on this particular area right here. I'm just kind of cleaning up the overall kind of form right there of that breast. I felt like we had a weird little divot right there. And then just any other areas that I feel like I could kind of improve. Just kind of zooming out there. It's feeling pretty good. Another thing that I'm noticing, just kind of moving around the image right here, is this area right here, some of those stray hairs. May want to go ahead and use the healing brush tool. Go ahead and kind of sample out a ways here. And we want to make sure that we switch the healing brush tool from current layer to all layers, because you could see nothing was happening there. It's like, what's going on? So again, I really like the healing brush tool. It preserves a lot of the texture, lighting, shadow. It just works a little bit better than the clone stamp tool. It allows you to kind of weave in a lot of this sampled information much easier. And there's some areas you kind of have to finesse it a little bit. I'm just kind of using a soft round brush right there to kind of weave that in. Again, just kind of coming around kind of the neck area right there, just kind of cleaning up a lot of that, a lot of those stray hairs that we have right there. And so as I do this, I'm kind of zooming out, kind of seeing how everything is looking. Maybe something like on the ear, I might just want to use the clone stamp. So just kind of play around with some of these different tools to see which one works, best for you. Okay. And just kind of zooming out. So that's already feeling a lot better, just getting rid of a lot of those stray hairs. And we can really kind of continue finessing that and cleaning that up to our liking. But just kind of continuing to move around the entire image. If you recall earlier in the course, you remember when we pulled this arm over and we had to kind of erase right here to reveal what was underneath. I can kind of noticing a few little kind of hard spots right there. They're very subtle. But again, this may be where we want to use the healing brush tool to kind of blend all that a little bit more smoothly. And again, I'm trying not to damage the martini glass. Just mainly kind of right around in here in the neck area. Just kind of keeping that a little bit more blended together, a little bit more smooth overall. And towards the end of the previous lesson, I kind of talked about these seams right here in the dress, these little fine seams. May want to go ahead and make another layer. And let's switch to our brush tool. And in this case, I may want to go ahead and have shape dynamics just turned on so I can kind of control the size of the brush tip based off of how much pressure I apply. So just sampling from that. And kind of come in there and just kind of clean up some of these seams, spots like this where may want to just kind of make it look like it's still kind of wrapping around, following the contours of the dress, any areas that, may have gotten damaged or lost while we were doing all this photo manipulation. So just kind of coming around like that, just painting them in, really. And just kind of making a comparison. So at this point, I'm just focusing on, really small, little subtle things to make overall improvements to the entire image as a whole. Just going around tweaking any little last minute things. So you can already see how we've made some significant changes just in this lesson. So overall, it's feeling pretty nice. At this point, I may want to go ahead and kind of group all of this stuff together right here, just hitting Control G. And I'll just go ahead and call that group the same thing as that merged copy. And now we can make kind of a final comparison. So we've made quite the change to our female model in her cocktail dress. And I'm thinking it's looking pretty good. And again, every project is different. Every model that you're working on, it's going to pose a different set of problems and things to deal with. But hopefully you've enjoyed this course and you're able to take different things that we've done throughout and are able to apply it to your own projects. And again, we've primarily worked in Liquify, but we've also used a few tools over here in our tool panel. So thank you for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this course. I hope you've had a lot of fun. This is a fun project. And we'll see you again in the future on another course. So we'll see you later.